Hi, welcome to the Herbal Hour. I'm Stephen Horne. With me is Dr. Kimberly Balas, and today we're going to be talking about stress. Our topic today is relax to the max, and we're going to be giving you 7 keys to helping reduce stress in your life. Now, Kim, being a new mom, you can't possibly know what stress is, can you?
Oh, I have no clue. Let's just amplify that, and then I'll tell you about it.
Actually, I think everybody in their life goes through at least some periods of time where we're under a lot of stress, and we need things that are going to help us unwind from that stress. But before we can talk about some of these things that will help us unwind from the stress, we need to understand a little bit better what stress is. Stress isn't just stressful events in our lives. It's the physiological response of our body to those events. And the reason why I have to stress that is because 2 people could experience the same event, and to one it would be exhilarating, and the other person it would be stressful. And so a lot of it depends on how we react to a particular event. And it's the physiological responses in our body that we need to be concerned about, because when we get too much of those stress responses in our body, it can create a lot of health problems. So to start with, there are 3 stages of stress. These were identified by Dr. Horne. Stage 1 is the alarm phase, stage 2 is the resistance phase, and stage 3 is the exhaustion stage. And we're going to cover each one of these. The first stage, the alarm stage, is what happens when someone jumps you from behind a building. The medulla in your brain triggers the sympathetic nervous system to kick in gear, which we'll talk about in a minute, and the hypothalamus and pituitary release hormones that stimulate the adrenal cortex to produce stress hormones to gear our body up to react to this. So that surge of adrenaline you feel, that jump that when something scares you or startles you, that's the alarm phase. And that actually only lasts for a short period of time. Now, when the stress is continuous and keeps going, a person goes into the resistance phase. And in the resistance phase, the stress persists and the production of these stress hormones persist. And as that happens, the nutrients that are needed to make these start to become depleted, and the glands start to weaken as a result of the continuous stress response. So the person starts to feel chronically stressed and starts to get fatigued as they go into the resistance stage. The resistance stage can very rapidly go into the exhaustion phase depending on how much nutrient reserves a person has. A person who has better nutrition is going to be able to resist the stress longer, but at a certain point the body becomes depleted, the glands weaken, and we go into the exhaustion stage. And in the exhaustion stage, the adrenals in particular become exhausted, which results in low levels of DHEA and cortisol, and the person feels chronically tired and kind of what we call burned out. I don't know, I've had a few times in my life where I felt burned out. How about you?
Yeah, well, when you go back to the alarm phase, I just want to mention on there the adrenocorticotropic stimulating hormone that comes from pituitary. And that, there are different reasons that get stimulated. It gets stimulated from that instant cortisol release, but it also stays stimulated when you go into phase 2, when you're under that constant stress. That hormone stays high. So that also does several things, though, is it helps break down fats, but it also kind of stimulates cortisol, and we know how cortisol over a prolonged period of time can raise your insulin levels, and that in turn can raise blood pressure levels. So we've got a whole slew of just this domino effect that occurs health-wise when we're looking at the hormone that's released that stimulates the adrenals from the pituitary.
And it really doesn't matter whether the stress is real or imagined. It's the physiological response of the body that still is the same, right?
Right. So if you have a really stressful dream, you're still going to go through all of the chemical reactions that you have of producing cortisol, elevating cortisol, producing ACTH. Okay, all of those responses still occur. And it also occurs just with thought processes as well, because if you walk around going, I feel stressed, I feel stressed, I feel stressed, then your body's going to believe that you feel stressed. So when you have events and things going on like that you are feeling the stress, then the chemical part of the body is going to respond accordingly.
So you mean negative thought processes can make me even more stressed?
So the stinking thinking. Okay. And there's a really good there was a movie out several years ago called What the Bleep Do We Know? And it talks about how you have these receptor sites for these neuropeptides that get released. And the more that you keep talking to yourself, and the more that you have these negative thought processes, or the more that you are convincing yourself that, this stresses me, this stresses me, or you're having those dreams, recurring scenarios in that, when those cells replicate, they actually keep getting duplicated with less and less and less receptor sites for these aminos and these proteins that deliver nutrients to the cells. So the stress not only affects our nervous system, hormone production, but nutrient delivery as well. And then when we go into things like drugs and interaction with some of the drugs, is a lot of the steroids will lower the adrenocorticotropic hormone, but in turn that also sends some of the inflammation up too, because it gives it a false response of not releasing the cortisol. So you're still getting stress, but the chemicals aren't occurring like they should. So now we've got a whole another little loop going over there with certain drug interactions.
Bottom line is a heck of a lot of health conditions are tied into stress, aren't they?
A lot of stress conditions.
A lot of stress conditions.
Activate like what's going on with how we talk to ourselves, with how those neuropeptides receive those amino acids. So,
okay, so these neuropeptides, these neurotransmitters, these hormones, they're all messengers. And so it's these chemical messengers that are mediating the stress. So stress is regulated by these chemical messengers from the nervous system and glandular system. So we need to understand a little bit about what those different messengers are. And to start off, we'll look at the nervous system. The nervous system is responsible for your initial but short-lived reaction to stress. That initial, because the nervous system sends signals that operate really quickly. And there are two branches to the nervous system, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Actually, I should say there are two branches to the autonomic nervous system that controls heart rate and so forth. The sympathetic is responsible for the fight or flight response of stress, and it prepares the body for activity by doing things like increasing the heart rate and blood flow to the muscles. In contrast, the parasympathetic nervous system allows us to rest and digest. It basically helps the body unwind and moves blood to the digestive and sexual organs and away from the muscles. So there's a balance constantly going on between these two. The parasympathetic is more active at night, the sympathetic is more active in the day, and you actually have an acid-alkaline reaction with these because the sympathetic makes you more acid, parasympathetic makes you more alkaline. But since we're talking about stress, we want to focus on what's happening with the sympathetic nervous system with stress. Now, the sympathetic nervous system dilates the bronchioles and pupils. It increases blood sugar levels by encouraging fat and muscle breakdown and the release of sugar from the liver. It also increases the heart rate and blood pressure. Other sympathetic effects include the blood moves from to the muscles, liver, and brain. Clotting time is reduced. The pH decreases, meaning the body becomes more acidic. There's an initial stimulating effect and then a inhibiting effect on elimination. You know, who's so scaredy, whatever. But then ultimately, if prolonged sympathetic effects actually inhibit your eliminative processes, and then it increases the production of the adrenocorticotropic. Anyway, ACTH. I prefer to call it ACTH because that's a mouthful to pronounce. But these are all effects that are taking place from the sympathetic nervous system. So you can see that prolonged stress is going to elevate your blood pressure. It's going to make you constipated. It's going to cause your blood sugar to raise. It's going to have this host of negative effects on the body that a lot of people are experiencing in our society.
Well, and what happens on another level with that is the body has to rewire itself. So you have firings and rewirings. So when you're getting these neurotransmitters and they're firing into these receptor sites, and it's telling the body how it should act chemically according to certain scenarios and situations, and with the brain controlling that because of the visual aspect of that, and we see things, like you said, two people see two different situations. One can be exhilarating, one can be stressful. So like skydiving for me is probably exhilarating, and for you it's probably stressful. So we rewire ourselves, and literally the neuropeptides and everything in there go into a rewiring because it's your adaptability to your environment. So when you go into more of a sympathetic response, you still have those firings going on saying, okay, this comes out, this is stress, this is how I respond to this. And a lot of times when you have people like with ADD, ADHD, they literally rewired themselves, or they came into this world rewired like that they have different firings going on in the system.
Well, people also are sympathetic or parasympathetic dominant. So if you tend to run more of a sympathetic profile where those sympathetic neurotransmitters tend to be elevated, then stress is going to affect you in a more negative way because it's going to throw you further out of balance. Whereas if you're more parasympathetic wired, which is what most ADHD people are, then stress is actually going to increase your sympathetic and kind of balance out your excess
focus.
Parasympathetic. You know, and actually these stress chemicals are not entirely bad. I mean, the whole reason we go to an amusement park and ride on rides is because we like the thrill of the adrenaline rush and the stimulation of those particular chemicals.
But when you're in a stage 2 for a prolonged period of time, that doesn't become fun anymore. You've done the rewiring, and now it's like, okay, feeling that rush or that sensation, even like from something fun like a roller coaster, can cause stress because you've been in that situation for too long.
Then it could cause you anxiety or so forth. Now the glandular system is also involved here, and it produces the longer lasting reactions to stress because hormones last longer in the system than neurotransmitters do. And so, Kim, why don't you tell us a little bit about the adrenal hormones, because it's really the adrenals that are the major glands that are involved in mediating stress.
The adrenals are, and with a feedback loop where it connects and it talks to the hypothalamus, it talks to the pituitary, you know, with all the release of different hormones, interacts with the liver. But basically with the adrenal you have two parts, and you have the medulla, okay, which is the center, and that produces like our epinephrine and our norepinephrine, or the adrenal and noradrenal, and that controls a lot of our allergy responses, histamine reactions, a lot of skin type issues, how we feel excited, especially in that stage 1. With that rush of adrenaline. Then we have the adrenal cortex, which is the actual outer layer, and that's where our hormones are mostly produced or regulated through that. And you have different things. You have glucocorticoids, you have mineralocorticoids, you have androgens, which are your sex hormones. So there are several different ways. Also with the adrenal, they actually move protein through the liver. So when we talk about different things like the adrenaline and the noradrenaline, that also increases the rate and the strength of the heartbeat, causing the blood pressure to elevate in some instances, especially, you know, if you do have that first response, that alarm phase, it's going to go up. Staying in that stress response for an extended period of time is going to keep the blood pressure up, and that's because of the extended cortisol levels of how it affects that. Then it also, when your adrenaline and noradrenaline stay elevated, it's going to direct blood away from the skin and the digestive organs. And it's going to take it to the muscles, the liver, and the brain, and that's where those rewirings come in, how the body kind of reroutes itself to handle the stress that's going on. So when you're taking that blood flow away from the digestive organs, then you're going to start getting less and less and less nutrient absorption as well.
And that's why it's a good idea to eat in a relaxed setting. You know, where a lot of people in our modern society are like eating on the run, you know, dashing from place to place. And you really can't digest very well unless you do what people traditionally did, which is you sit down, you calm down, you create an environment where you're getting into a more relaxed space, and then digestion improves and you're going to get better nutrient absorption.
So you can't go through the drive-thru and have like a carbonated drink that shuts your hydrochloric acid down and have like a nice fatty hamburger that has all the trans fats in it that you can't digest anyway and think that it's not going to be stressful, and then, oh yeah, you're eating that in your car because you're 15 minutes late getting to your next appointment? You mean that's going to affect your digestive system?
Yeah, just a little bit. Not much, just a little bit. You've never done that, huh? Okay. Well, tell us about the glucocorticoids.
Okay, let's look at glucocorticoids. What are glucocorticoids? Well, they actually are responsible for raising blood sugar levels. So this is how the adrenals control insulin. They have some anti-inflammatory effects that go on in the body. They depress the immune response, and Actually, they're cell-mediated immune responses. So what's going on within the cell itself, more so than like the immune system totally as a whole. So they mimic some of the synthetic mimics of the glucocorticoids that we have are cortisol, that's used in therapies a lot, like your natural steroid. Hydrocortisone, your steroids, things like that. Those reduce inflammation. They use them a lot to prevent rejection when you have organ transplants. Also, it's used to control asthma, which most of your asthma situations are directly related to the adrenal gland. And hereditary asthmas like stress, during the mother, during pregnancy. A lot of it can be allergens. We talked about how the adrenal medulla with that noradrenaline, the histamine responses with that controls that. So when you come in with an exhausted adrenal and then you have allergens that are irritating that further, you're going to have a lot of the asthma type situations. Mm-hmm. The next one we want to talk about is cortisol. Okay.
That's the chief glucocorticoid.
It is, or hydrocortisone. Okay. Yeah. So this is a vasoconstrictor. It's actually the primary glucocorticoid, but it's an inflammatory mediator. This does elevate blood sugar. So when you elevate the blood sugar and the insulin that way, it causes muscle tissue breakdown. And then it also increases how you are depositing fat in the body. So if you think about how you deposit fat and where you deposit fat, and you look at why fat exists in the first place, is because it binds with toxins to save your life. So you're doing the deposition of fat in certain areas, and that's because usually if cortisol levels stay elevated for too long, you're going to have problems regulating insulin and breaking down fat.
And that's why those TV commercials call it a nasty little hormone.
Oh, the cortisol, yeah.
Yeah, but it really isn't totally bad.
Well, it does influence the metabolism of the fats and the carbs and the proteins. And when it's elevated, you go all the way back up again, like we talked about with the adrenaline and the noradrenaline, that it takes the blood flow away from the digestive system. So it's all about that rerouting, and the body has to do what it needs to do there, but sometimes the rerouting is not always the most beneficial thing. It's just to get us by. But when we stay in those situations for too long, it stays in that situation for too long as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so with the excessive cortisol production, that fat deposition, insulin resistance we talked about, you also have where you're hungry a lot. Like you eat and, an hour later you're hungry again. You also tend to have sugar cravings, and of course with those come weight gain. And then the blood pressure that we talked about, that you're increasing the blood pressure. The cortisol can also dampen the immune system response, so it makes you more susceptible to infections. And especially what I have seen is infections in the cardiovascular system. Like a while back, the medical field didn't recognize that you actually got infections in the heart. And then all of a sudden they started coming out with these journals saying, oh, we think that we found out that you can get infections in the heart. So that's through that whole cardiovascular system.
And most people, I notice I'm more likely to get sick, get a cold or whatever when I'm stressed than I am when I'm
it takes your
relaxed.
Immune response down. So it takes your frequencies down. So it's kind of like two little kids fighting on a playground, because you're at this frequency normally and this allergen or irritants down here, but when you lower your immune response, you're kind of like bumping heads on the same level. So you have to increase your immune response again. So it does dampen the immune response. And then the infections, the heart's the hormone mixing chamber, so you're more susceptible to things happening there with the hormone-wise. So also the cortisol blocks testosterone receptor sites. It causes the brain to become less receptive to insulin. So with women, you get those hot flashes. And then it can kill brain cells. So this is your brain. This is your brain on cortisol.
Okay.
So it also suppresses melatonin. So when you have that elevated cortisol and it stays elevated for too long, then that's when you might, experience insomnia, a hard time getting to sleep, a hard time staying asleep. It also suppresses the luteinizing hormone, and that stimulates ovulation in females. So it could be the answer to a lot of our infertility problems going on.
Right. I mean, think about it. I mean, when times of war, stress, whatever, it's a mechanism to prevent conception, because that's not a time when you want to get pregnant. But then if you're under a lot of stress and you do want to get pregnant, then that's going to cause a problem.
Well, and the stress is a big issue I see with women that I work with that are working on fertility issues. And then again, there's rapid aging. Okay, so it increases the aging process when the cortisol level stays high for too long. Mm-hmm. Okay, then we have insulin and cortisol together. So we talked about how the high cortisol levels increase the insulin resistance. And then the insulin resistance also then in turn increases the cortisol. So now you're in this vicious cycle here. And then you get those constant hunger, the sugar cravings, you're really craving a lot of the refined carbohydrates. And it becomes like an addiction. Like you get cranky, you get moody, you have to have that, you know.
If you don't get that sugar fix.
Like just move away from the chocolate and no one will get hurt. Okay. So, you know, you're going into that. And then of course that brings on that weight gain.
Of course, the good thing about cortisol is if you don't have enough, then you've got problems with inflammation because it's an anti-inflammatory hormone.
It is an anti-inflammatory regulator. So we're looking at how you have that acute inflammation, cortisol elevates to regulate that. But when you have chronic underlying inflammation, then we're back to the cortisol being too high for too long. So it's lost its sensitivity, so to speak, of what's going on in the body, of regulating the inflammation. So the chronic inflammation and the pain do stimulate the cortisol production, and then the chronic inflammation has that does have a stress-producing action on the body, so it can deplete the adrenal glands.
So in other words, if we've got chronic inflammation going on, it's initially going to stimulate cortisol production and create a stress response in the body to fight that, but ultimately just the chronic inflammation alone is going to help deplete the adrenal glands.
Because it's going to keep stimulating cortisol production, which takes our stress level up, which can and eventually turn into some of your autoimmune responses as well.
Well, the ACTH also stimulates the mineral corticoids. So what do those do? The
mineral corticoids, okay, we have the adrenals are responsible for moving insulin, moving minerals, also liver movement protein movement through the liver. So in the mineral corticoids, when your minerals come in, it's how the sodium-potassium pump works in the cell, okay? It's how the minerals get delivered to the cell. It's how the minerals are used to buffer, because when we go into stress situations, we tend to go into acid pH situations, and the minerals help to buffer that. So when we look at aldosterone, okay, we're going to look at how it promotes the reabsorption of sodium from the kidney into the blood, and that draws the water into the blood. And also, the aldosterone is what helps control the blood pressure. So a lot of times when people have high blood pressure with stress, you look at the kidneys, because the kidneys regulate how your potassium and your sodium are being eliminated. Okay, so when that goes in and you help maintain the blood pressure that way, if you always look at the kidneys when you're working on blood pressure, it's usually related to stress when that issue occurs.
So the release of this hormone is another reason why stress tends to elevate blood pressure over time.
Right, exactly. And it inhibits perspiration to prevent sodium loss. So you get the people that don't sweat a lot. Yeah. And then it also sensitizes your salt taste buds so that you're really sensitive to salty foods.
Yeah, actually what I understand is it actually increases the desire to eat salt because it's promoting the reabsorption of sodium, but it's actually trying to get more sodium into the body. So it makes you, that's why you also may crave salty snacks when you're stressed. And
that's why the adrenals run on sodium. So that's like your energy transporter is sodium. So as long as you're doing the natural sea salt, the real salt, the Celtic salt, that's fine. Because that's what the adrenals actually need to help with the transport issues, which is why you actually, with the real salt, can actually help lower blood pressure.
But then the Celtic salt and real salt and the natural salts contain other minerals, which is partly what this is also is regulating the movement
because
of minerals.
What happens is the aldosterone helps to regulate the extracellular electrolytes, the concentration of the extracellular electrolytes. So that's why you would crave the sodium.
Okay, so the last one is the androgens, and can you tell us a little bit about those? One of the principal ones, of course, is the
principal one is testosterone. Okay, and then you have estrogen and progesterone. But in testosterone, especially in females, it's the adrenal cortex. It's the major source of the androgen, but there's that hypersecretion of testosterone in females. which can be because of the stress. It's a response to stress of how the body releases the testosterone, and that can produce like excessive body hair or disruption in their menstruation cycles. That's why a lot of women have to have waxing done here on like the upper lip, like on the chin area sometimes
adrenals
as well.
Are producing too much.
The adrenals are in such a state of anxiety that they're producing too much testosterone. So it does throw the other hormones out. I do the hormone saliva testing to kind of see where those are. But even in doing hormone saliva testing and working with specific, like the bioidentical hormones on that, you can't do any of that without working on the adrenals. So the adrenals are the key here, that you have to constantly put something in, and we're going to talk about which supplements later, but how to supplement the adrenals that way.
Great. Well, I think now we've kind of covered the technical part and understand a little bit about what's going on with stress with the nerves and the glands, particularly the adrenals. So let's look at some of the things we can do to reduce stress. And here are the 7 keys we want to talk about in this video. The first one is to learn to breathe deeply. The second one is to practice a technique called the relaxation response, which we'll be describing to you a little later. The third is to avoid caffeine and other stimulants, which overstimulate the adrenals and contribute to that stress response. Next is to avoid sugar and other simple carbohydrates like refined white flour, a lot of potatoes and things that raise the blood sugar. Next one is to exercise regularly, then to feed the nerves, and finally to supplement with nervines and adaptogens to help reduce the stress. So we're going to cover each one of these, and we'll start with talking about the importance of breathing. So our stress-less key, number 1, is to learn to breathe deeply. In fact, if you pay attention next time you're under stress, I will bet you find that you're holding your breath or breathing very shallowly. And it's amazing how taking control of your breathing can immediately lower your stress response. The diaphragm, which is the muscle responsible for breathing, is the only muscle which is under both our conscious and unconscious control. So either we can breathe as an unconscious reaction and have our breath just taking place automatically, or we can actually consciously choose to breathe in a particular way. And this is important to know because the breathing actually helps regulate our emotional response. Now, to understand deep breathing, we need to understand that the way that we're supposed to breathe is there's a muscle right in here called the diaphragm. And if we pull up the thing, the diaphragm pulls downward in order to inflate the lungs and contracts upward in order to push air out of the lungs. So the effect of this is that when you're deep breathing, your abdomen should move. And if you watch a baby breathing, you'll see their tummy rising and falling. We should be doing the same thing. Our breathing should be taking place from down here. But most people are breathing up here because they're holding so much tension in their body. So if you practice breathing from the diaphragm abdominally, it actually drops your energy from being up here to being dropped down here, and you actually feel more centered, more grounded. I've demonstrated this in classes where you have someone stand up and you have them breathe from their chest, and you push on their shoulder right here, and they'll practically topple over. You get them to drop down and breathe in their abdomen, and you push on their shoulder, and they're much more stable. In other words, life can't push you around as much when you're breathing from your diaphragm. And the majority of the people I see as clients don't know how to breathe from their diaphragm, don't breathe from their diaphragm, and so the stress is a major issue for them. Now, every emotion that we experience has a particular breathing state. So if that's the case, then we can either experience the emotion and just let it control us, or we can actually control our breathing and change the emotions that we're feeling. So for example, when we're angry, there's a prolonged inhalation followed by an explosive exhalation, like Grief is the opposite. With grief, the inhalation is prolonged. And there's a shorter exhalation. Anxiety breathing is rapid and shallow. Depression breathing is slow and shallow. If you ever see someone depressed, they're breathing very slowly and very shallowly. In fear, we tend to hold our breath. So any of these stressful emotional states, we can get an immediate change through the nervous system by paying attention to our breathing and slowing our breathing down and breathing from our diaphragm. So the breathing pattern for feeling relaxed is slow, deep, and it's also even. So we need to learn to pay attention to the breathing, and then we can learn to soothe our nervousness, fears, and anxieties. When I remember to do that, it really works. But the hard part is when you're stressed, it's hard to remember to do that. But of course, I learned this little stress-reducing breathing exercise from a college professor I had. When you're stressed and you stop and you think, how am I breathing right now? Just notice your breath. And then take a deep breath in, thinking, I am relaxed. I am relaxed. And it's amazing how quickly that will change your whole mood and energy around. Another really good breathing exercise for reducing stress is to do what I call squaring your breath, which is to make the inhalation, exhalation, and the holding patterns the same. So you count as you breathe. So you breathe, think in 2, 3, 4, hold 2, 3, 4, out 2, 3, 4, hold 2, 3, 4. So I do it. So it's like this. I was watching the movie The Karate Kid, and the instructor was having him go like this. Breathe in, hold, breathe out, hold, same thing. So it's getting so that the inhalation, exhalation, and the holding patterns at the top of the breath and the bottom of the breath are all the same length. And that really centers or calms down your emotions. Now, there are a lot of benefits for deep breathing besides reducing your stress. It relieves pain and reduces inflammation. It alkalizes your pH. In fact, it's one of the fastest ways to alkalize your pH. It centers your emotions. It calms the sympathetic nervous system and activates the parasympathetic nervous system. And it also pumps your lymphatics. So,
well, that's because those lungs are the first layer to the buffering system of the pH. So when you can control that, you can regulate the other 7 layers of the pH buffering system.
Wow. So breathing is real important there. Now, adding on to breathing, our stress less technique number 2 is to practice the relaxation response. And this is a real important exercise. Some people would call this meditation, and we call it the relaxation response because meditation for some people has a spiritual connotation, and that's not necessarily what we're trying to do here. The stress begins with perception. Okay, you have to perceive something as stressful. And so the stress chemicals are only going to be released whenever you perceive a stressful experience, whether it's real or imaginary. So if you are able to change your perception, you'll change the chemicals being released in your body and you'll change your stress level. And that's where the relaxation response comes in. This is a simple, non-religious form of meditation that trains you to control your thoughts and teaches you how to relax your body. It was developed by Dr. Herbert Benson, who's the president of the Mind Body Medical Institute and Mind Body Medical Institute Associate Professor of Medicine at Harvard Medical School. And he wrote this book a long time ago. I read it many years ago, and talks about how you create this relaxation response. And here are the steps. One is you sit or lie down in a comfortable position, and starting at your toes, and then you tense and kind of relax your muscles so that you let all of the muscles in your body kind of go limp. Help sometime to think of your muscles as getting like warm and heavy. And if you're having trouble relaxing a particular group of muscles, if you tense it up momentarily and then let go of it, it helps your body to unwind. Once you've started to let your body relax, then you start focusing on your breathing, just like we did in the previous exercise, and you breathe slowly and deeply. But you don't stop there. what you want to do is create a single focus for your mind. Now, in traditional spiritual meditation, people did this with like a mantra or something like that. Dr. Benson used a simple thing of using the word like one and repeating it over and over and over again. One, 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 one. Now, what happens is when you do this simple focus to your mind, you actually kind of bore your logical left brain, where you're having your monkey chatter going on all the time, and it allows it to quiet down and allows the more intuitive or nonverbal part of your brain to become more active. And it also shifts your brainwave patterns, activates your parasympathetic nervous system, and also helps you learn that you actually can control your thoughts. Now, if thoughts come up, and thoughts will come up, what you do is you kind of observe them, and you don't like buy into those thoughts. You just go back to repeating your syllable 1, 1, 1 or whatever you're doing. Even counting the breath, the in 2, 3, 4, hold 2, 3, 4, so forth, will do the same thing because it creates a repetitive focus for your brain. And practicing this will really teach you how to control your thoughts and get it so that you can really reduce your stress level. Now, of course, that's not going to do much good if you go out and then start thinking negatively all the time. So the goal of this is to learn to get this so that you can start to incorporate it into your everyday life. All right, Kim, you want to talk about our next 2 stress reduction techniques?
Okay, so we're going to look at stress level key number 3, okay, and that's avoiding caffeine and other stimulants. And these are adrenal stimulants that work to stimulate the sympathetic. And so the sympathetics tend to have more stress reaction with these, and sometimes the parasympathetic have almost like that opposite effect.
Well, like
with
ADHD
them.
Kids actually benefit from a little bit of
from
caffeine.
The guarana and some of the stuff, yeah. So we have different things that have caffeine-containing items in them. We have the coffee, we have tea, your cola drinks, your guarana, chocolate, and even though some of these, like the guarana and the chocolate, and some of those do have some benefits, your teas. There was a study with people that were dominant sympathetic where they did PET scans, the positive emission tomography scanning in the brain. And what they did is they took a person that had 400 milligrams of caffeine during the day, or during a certain period of time. And that's kind of like if you have coffee, it's like about 175 milligrams. I think like a soda is like 40 milligrams. Then your chocolate, like a normal size chocolate bar, not like the king size Mondo that you see in all the little mini marts, but just the regular size is like about 25 milligrams of chocolate. And they had, by the time you do all of those, you can see where that would add up to like 400 milligrams in a pretty short period of time. And they did this imaging of the brain, and it showed that one brain pattern they showed it was a full-blown, clinically diagnosed schizophrenic, and the positron topography testing on the PET scan on the other one was somebody on caffeine, and they looked identical.
Oh, in other words, it makes your brain like a schizophrenic.
It sends you into that stress-related activity in the brain. So that's where we were talking about earlier with rewiring, because when you have chemical activities coming into the body, then it does have to rewire. And whether those chemical activities are caused by stimulants or actual chemical substances coming in or thought processes, it's the same to the body. It doesn't distinguish between the two very easily.
Well, part of the thing here with the stimulants is that people are addicted to that adrenaline rush, but too much of that adrenaline rush is not good for you because it prevents you from being able to do the opposite too, which is to unwind.
Right, and it keeps that chronic inflammation level high. I mean, that's why we have all of the energy drinks that are out there now, the Red Bull, the Yep, and all of those that are, again, that adrenaline rush. So we want to look at the adrenal stimulants. They're constantly stimulating the adrenal gland. So what happens is that causes faster nutrient depletion. So when you're depleting the nutrients, again, we're going back to how many receptor sites are on the cell to take the nutrients in, and you start reducing those when you start having too many stimulants or the negative thought processes. You also create an acid pH environment, and that can lead to a whole host of other chronic diseases and chronic situations going on in the body. And doing excessive amounts of coffee can cause adrenal exhaustion because you're like hyperstimulating the adrenals, and then they're in that constant revved up state and they don't get any downtime. So let's look at number 4 now. The stress less key number 4 is to avoid sugar and other simple carbs. So that is like avoiding your high glycemic carbohydrates, the things that break into to sugar faster. So they're higher on the glycemic index. So why are those bad for the adrenals? Well, the adrenals perceive that they have this low blood sugar as a threat. So what they do is they kick in, or they initiate a response to bring the blood sugar back up, because the adrenals actually regulate how the insulin, or those glucocorticoids, are controlled. So then the blood sugar spikes as a result of these simple sugars, refined carbohydrates, or the high glycemic carbohydrates. And then it takes a nosedive, it crashes. So you spike it really quickly, and then you take this nosedive that you go back down. Well, when that happens, the adrenals have to kick into gear to bring the blood sugar back up. So it stays up for a little while, then the adrenals kick in, and it has to say, oh, okay, now it's bottomed out, and I have to bring it back up to where it was. Well, the more sugar coming in, each time it has to regulate it back to where it was. And this may even happen like in the middle of the night while you're sleeping, that the blood sugar bottoms out like that, and then the adrenals have to bring it back up, and it makes you wake up, and then you have a hard time going back to sleep. So the people that have the insomnia where they can fall asleep, but then they can't stay asleep very long, then you need to work on the adrenals with that, of working with the nervines and the adaptogens, and instead of just taking a prescription drug to knock you out.
You know, I when I found this, I thought this was really interesting, because I've had that happen to me, where all of a sudden you just bounce awake, you know, like in the morning, like 3 or 4 a.m., and you can't go back to sleep. And it is the fact that what's happened is your adrenals are exhausted, and so cortisol, which normally keeps your blood sugar up during the night, is low. And so when the blood sugar falls and the body can't bring it up again, then basically the adrenaline kicks in gear as an emergency response to bring the sugar up, and boom, you pop awake and you can't go back to sleep, because you've just got a surge of adrenaline to bring your blood sugar up.
And then if you look at, you know, a lot of your prescription medications, I know Ambien's really popular, where you just puts you to sleep, that you stay asleep. Well, then that kind of like deregulates the body and how it's dealing with its insulin levels. So you've lost a lot of your blood pressure control, your insulin level control there, because you've suppressed a symptom. So
it really helps also to not eat the simple carbs at night, and have a little bit of protein snack before going to bed.
Have the protein and the fats, to increase the fats there as well. Okay, so and then number 5, stress list number 5 is exercising regularly. So when you gear up and you have this excess energy and this adrenaline rush, if you go use that, because basically the body was designed to gear up like that for physical activity. So you would have like the hunter-gatherers, you know, the Paleolithic area, they go out and, okay, they're sleeping outside, and they have to be consciously aware of what's going on in their environment, and before you know it's kill or be killed at that point, and they're going to go out and they have that adrenaline rush coming in. Well, they took action. They got up and they moved. They ran, okay? So we're not doing that now, so we don't have a lot of the exercise. We've become a high glycemic vegetable, as in a couch potato. So
well, and you're on the freeway, and people are trying to kill you with their automobiles, but you can't physically move. You're still getting the stress response with all the hormones kicking in gear.
And you can't physically step on the gas pedal to go faster because somebody's in front of you.
So that's part of the problem with the modern society, is that we aren't able to physically act out the stress, and therefore it actually gets to us more.
Well, some people do. It's called road rage.
Yes, so that's getting more common.
So does that actually make them healthier because they're acting out their stress?
I don't know.
So part of the problem is that when we get into those stressful situations, and especially at work, you know, you're confined to a work type environment and you can't get up and do anything about it. So exercise is going to be a key outlet for that, where you can get up, you can do the movement, get on the treadmill, get on the mini tramp, you know, get on the Stairmaster, go do a circuit of some weight bearing exercises, and
or
that's going
walk.
To help. Getting out walking in nature, but that's just going to help reduce a lot of those stress levels, because it gives the chemistry something to put that towards, to work towards. So it helps us burn off those hormones. It helps us unwind. I think that's why some people can really get like addicted to working out, because it helps with that.
Yeah. Well, our final key for stressing, well, actually, sorry, no, we have 2 more. Our stress less key number 6 is feed your nerves and your glands, because you need to have good nutrition in order to be able to cope with stress. We've stressed through here that one of the problems with chronic stress is the depleting of the nutrient reserves that help the body manage stress. And one of the advantages of those hunter-gatherer peoples is they were getting a lot more nutritionally dense foods than we are, so they had a lot more nutritional reserves too to cope with that stress. So there are some very important nutrients that are needed by the nerves and the adrenals, and these include the B-complex vitamins, which are removed from carbohydrates when you refine and make white flour and refined sugar, vitamin C, which depletes rapidly in foods that are not stored, magnesium, which is in a lot of dark green leafy vegetables, and we don't eat a lot of those, potassium similarly, and actually cholesterol is real important for stress along with other essential fatty acids. In fact, it's very important to get adequate fats for dealing with stress. Those adrenal hormones, the glucocorticoids, mineralocorticoids, and so forth, are made from cholesterol, which most people think is a bad thing.
Well, you have glycerol combustion in the cell, okay, which are your triglycerides, and that creates an energy. Well, that energy not only flushes toxins out of the cell, but it's helping the uptake of the nutrients. So if you don't have enough combustion, it's kind of like with your car, if you don't have a spark, it doesn't start. So if you're not getting combustion in the cells, they're not going to take up the nutrients.
Yeah. So some of the supplements that can help feed our nerves in modern society are the balanced B complex, or just a B complex vitamin supplement, Nutricalm, which we'll talk about in a minute, cellular energy, which helps increase that combustion in the cells for energy production, pantothenic acid, which is very important for adrenal function and really helps with exhausted adrenals, adrenal support, which is adrenal glandular, and also distress remedy, which is a flower remedy that helps your body calm down and cope with stressful situations.
I really recommend everybody carrying that with them everywhere they go. I pretty much tell everybody to keep distress remedy in your pocket, put it in your purse, just, that way you always have it on hand, and it works really quickly. You can really start to feel the effects of it.
It's a good remedy for when people are feeling in shock or trauma to help them calm down. Our final stress less key, number 7, is to supplement with adaptogens and nervines. So when you have a lot of stress in your life, there are some specific remedies that you can take that are going to help reduce that level of stress. Nervines are typically herbs which either calm down the sympathetic nervous system or activate the parasympathetic nerves. So basically, you're going to reduce that stress response and increase that relaxation response. These are good herbs to help with digestion too, because again, if you activate the parasympathetic, you're going to be getting better digestion as well. Some examples of nervine herbs are hops, valerian, skullcap, kava kava, passion flower, chamomile, and lobelia. These are all good herbs to help a person relax and unwind from stress. Now, understanding adaptogens means we need to understand a little bit more about this stress thing. So again, what happens here, as seen in this chart, is when our brain perceives stress, it sends a message to the hypothalamus, which releases CRH, which goes to the pituitary, which releases the ACTH, which then goes to the adrenals and produces these stress hormones. And one of them is cortisol. And cortisol goes into a feedback loop back up to the hypothalamus. And when the cortisol level comes up in the blood, the hypothalamus stops releasing CRH. So that's the feedback loop. One of the problems when your adrenals are exhausted is the pituitary and hypothalamus are sending the message, but the cortisol levels in the blood aren't coming up. So they keep sending the message, and so the adrenals are getting constantly stimulated, but they can't keep up with the stimulation, and that's where you get that fried, frazzled feeling. Well, adaptogens work in the same way in this loop by calming down the hypothalamus and pituitary to reduce the output of stress hormones from the adrenal glands. So the adrenal glands aren't getting constantly stimulated to have this excess stress. And so adaptogens can be really helpful in modern society where we have these stresses that we really can't physically act out, because it can modulate the release of stress hormones in these stressful circumstances. So if we're not releasing as many stress hormones, we're not going to have as strong a physiological response to that stress. Some of the adaptogens that have been identified include eleuthero root, which was formerly called Siberian ginseng. That was the first one that was identified. Your Korean and American ginseng, schizandra, suma, rhodiola, maca, and gotukola all have adaptogenic effects, as well as we're finding more and more adaptogens all the time. So we're going to end here by talking about some specific products that we can use to stress less in our lives. So the first one is NutriCalm. You feel free to throw in any comments you have about this.
Well, the NutriCalm has the hops, passion flower, and the valerian in it too. And a lot of people find that they can take those herbs in that combination with that vitamin B and the C complex, which I like because it has both of those in there together with the B and the C. But they can take those without it make you feeling tired, because a lot of times people will take valerian to sleep. But this just has this formula of how it just calms you down. And I recommend that people do this on a daily basis. I use it quite frequently with a lot of people for other things other than just stress. I actually use the NutriCalm a lot for digestive issues, which we're learning are related to the stress.
Well, and also a lot of people think when they see NutriCalm that it's going to like make them sleepy, but actually this actually gives you a lot of energy, because when you're calm, not stressed, you actually can still be energized and get things done. It's just you're not uptight while you're doing it.
Yeah, it takes the edge off.
Yes, it does.
And you still have the energy.
So basically NutriCalm feeds your nerves and your adrenals so that you're able to cope with the stress without becoming so uptight. Another good nervine formula is Stress J. Stress J is a gentle nervine. It contains chamomile, passion flower, and hops, but it also has an anti-inflammatory action on the digestive tract. And remember, we were talking earlier about how inflammation can trigger cortisol production and make you more stressed. So Stress J was also used with the intestinal soothe and build for digestive problems, as well as for helping to calm down the nerves. Another nervine formula is the Chinese stress relief. This is a Chinese formula which it contains several sources of natural calcium, and when your calcium level goes up in your bloodstream, it calms your nerves. It also contains some Chinese nervines, which are going to help you unwind from stress, and also contains a few herbs that help to balance the adrenal and nervous system function. And this is a really good one for people who tend to be anxiety prone, nervous, high strung people who are like, edgy, and fidgety and so forth. It kind of is a good general remedy for keeping them calm.
And I use a Chinese stress relief too for people that tend to, like we were talking about those breathing patterns with the anger, and people that tend to have more of a tendency to go into anger reactions. The Chinese stress relief really helps with that. So just quantify it that way a little bit.
Great. Herbal Sleep is a formula of hops, valerian, and passion flower. It promotes a parasympathetic nervous system response that helps the body unwind, and is a good one to take, like if you're coming home in the evening, instead of having a drink to try to relax, you take something like this. And it's also good to take shortly before bedtime if you're having problems relaxing, getting to sleep.
On an emotional level, it kind of helps when you feel overburdened, like you're having to carry the whole load. So I do have people take this during the day sometimes, and again, it's not like it just instantly puts you to sleep like a lot of the prescription meds that cover things up. It does take the stress level, it takes that edge off, so it helps when you're feeling overburdened or you're carrying the whole load, and it also helps to regulate heartbeat. So when you go into the anxiety-driven state with those people that tend to get the heart palpitations under stress, this one is really, really a good one to use. I've actually even had them open the capsule up and just put it under the tongue, like it instantly calms.
Yeah, and you also taught me, which we didn't have in notes here, but the magnesium complex also can really help when people are like feeling that restlessness and anxiety, opening up the capsule and dumping some under the tongue. I've used that.
And you can use, if you just need a little bit of a wake up, but without getting the adrenaline rush going on, you can use the cellular energy that way. You just open it up and put it under the tongue, and it tastes really bad, but it works.
Yeah, also a good one for energy if people are needing an energy boost is the Target Endurance. Nerve 8 is another one of the unnerving formulas. This one is anti-inflammatory because it contains white willow, black cohosh, and chamomile, all of which are anti-inflammatories, but it's also an antispasmodic because the black cohosh and wood betony and so forth relax muscle spasms. It also calms the nervous system down, parasympathetic nervous system.
It's like it's one of those that if you feel like you're just about to blow a fuse, that wood betony in there really, with the nerve 8, helps to calm a lot of anxiety type situations, especially irritation. That would be the distinction I would make between like the herbal sleep formula of like anxiety and then going to like the nerve 8 for like an irritation, like everything's just getting on your nerves that you want to snap.
If you're inflamed, then you've got that.
Right. So that's why that would be the distinction I would make between using those two.
Yeah. Well, our next remedies are remedies that more work on the adrenals, although some of them do have nervous system effects. The first one is the nervous fatigue formula. Nervous fatigue formula is another Chinese formula. It's an adaptogen and nerve tonic, and it's one that really helps people who feel burned out. They're tired, but they can't sleep properly through the night, and it really helps promote a restful sleep while improving energy levels.
And I find that the nervous fatigue does work a little bit better, has more of an affinity for your A blood types that tend to take the cortisol levels up, and they stay there and they stay there and they stay there. They tend to stay elevated for prolonged periods of time. So if you actually run AM cortisol testing on blood work, or you're doing the saliva testing for cortisol levels and it tends to stay elevated for long periods of time, then the nervous fatigue formula does reduce that over the prolonged period of time to help keep it down.
Right. Our next one's Suma combination. You want to talk about that one? Because I know you really like that one.
I like the Suma. Yeah, I use the Suma a lot. So the Suma combination has like adaptogenic effects, similar because it has the eleuthero in it. It has a little eleuthero. It enhances the blood flow to the brain, and it helps with emotional support and energy. So it does have like a relaxing effect, but it just kind of gives you like an endurance that you can deal with just everything coming at you. So I think a lot of even the stress levels that hit with the dominant parasympathetics, that the Suma works really effectively there.
Yeah, so this is a good one if you're feeling like you're under stress, but it's an ongoing stress and you need energy and to be able to cope with it on an ongoing basis.
It helps you with endurance.
Good. Adaptomax is a good formula if you're having stress that's affecting your immune system, because Adaptomax has a blend of a lot of different adaptogens in it: ginseng, rhodiola, eleuthero, Suma, ashwagandha, gymnosperma, and it helps to fight oxidative cellular damage because it has antioxidants in it, and also stimulates the immune system, and it helps with a variety of stressful situations.
This would be more with fatigue levels, that you've been at that stress level for so long that it just feels overwhelming, and it's starting to take you into a fatigue state of like not wanting to get out of bed in the morning, of starting to have even depressive thoughts. So that's where I would use the Adaptomax.
Okay, that's great. The next one we have is Nature's Cortisol, and this was formulated for weight loss, but it's actually a lot more than just for weight loss, because it contains herbs that reduce cortisol output. They help to balance blood sugar levels so that your blood sugar isn't spiking, and it also helps to balance blood sugar because it contains chromium and vanadium. So it's helping the adrenal function to be more balanced, especially helping to balance your blood sugar, which takes away some of the cravings and solves some of the problems with the fat deposition.
And I find that like using the Nature's Cortisol too, of putting a natural sodium in, again like with the real salt, or just putting parsley with it, it really helps to affect how well it's going to work with the adrenals.
Yeah, and Nature's Cortisol is more for like a stage 1, stage 2 stress response, whereas the next remedy, adrenal support, is definitely something people needed when they get into that stage 3. Because adrenal support is an adrenal glandular that also contains herbs and nutrients that help to rebuild the adrenal glands when they're exhausted. Nervous fatigue formula also helps there, but this really helps, and I've really found this to be beneficial for a lot of people, and I know you use it a lot too.
I use it a lot. It's probably the most potent one that we have because it does have the raw adrenal glandular in there. So not only does it go in as a remedy that's going to help in the situation of the chronic, but it's going to help rebuild to help take you out of that situation. And it also helps It helps with people that have impaired protein digestion too, because that relates back to the adrenals a lot. When you get that liver congestion, you're not breaking your proteins down, so it means you're not utilizing your energy from your proteins, so you still have that fatigue going on because of the nutrient depletion, and to help with the insulin regulation too, the adrenal support.
So kind of in summary, adrenal support is for burnout, fatigue, sleep disturbances, chronic inflammation and stress, helps with protein metabolism, energy.
Well, it's also going to help the glandular system as a whole, because you have the feedback loops that are initiated with the raw adrenal glandular, that it's going to help the hypothalamus have better communication with the pituitary, the hormones released, how the adrenal controls those hormones. So it actually deals with a lot of the hormonal control.
Yeah. In fact, I find that a heck of a lot of my clients need adrenal support, and I know you do similar things.
I pretty much put almost every person I see on some type of adrenal product, yeah.
That shows you how prevalent stress is in our culture.
Right.
Well, you know, the other thing is when we talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, that's really adrenal burnout. And I've seen a lot of people benefit with adrenal support who had post-traumatic stress disorder. So there you have it, our 7 keys to reducing stress in your life. I know that these keys have been really valuable for me because I've been through some very stressful times in my life, and these things have really helped me to cope better, and really I think I'd be far worse off if I hadn't had these problems. So we hope that you get the same kind of benefit from these things that we have. Thank you for watching.